Welcome to Business Pulse Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michael Brette. Business Pulse Talk Radio with the heartbeat of business. We have a great show with us today, and I have a very special guest, Peter Wojcik, and he's the CEO, founder, and the chairman of Pharmagreen Biotech Incorporated. It's a publicly traded company here in the United States. It's actually a Canadian-based company, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I want to, today's topic is going to be about hemp, about cannabis. And I know on other shows we've talked about that, but this is going to be a totally different show. Peter is very astute when it comes to the hemp and the cannabis business, different strains, and he's going to get into the technology of his business. Peter, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to a really great show and answering any questions that you might have for me.
Okay, let's start out with build a foundation for our listeners on Pharmagreen Biotech Incorporated. What is the company and what do they do?
Pharmagreen Biotech Inc., what we are is we specialize as a tissue culture company, and all the innovations kind of come with it. So the goods and services that we are going to be offering, right now we're building a 63,000 square foot building that we call the Cannabis Biotech Complex. Its location is about an hour and 20-minute east of Vancouver on 26 acres of land. And our primary business is to provide tissue cultured starter plantlets for the cannabis industry. Predominantly, we're more interested in the hemp side and producing plantlets that are in high CBD and less than 0.3% THC, so it makes it a hemp strain. Some of the other technologies that we're bringing brand new to the cannabis industry overall is also live storage of strains. How do you store a strain? Well, you either have the seed or you have to keep the mother plant alive. Mother plants get old just like humans and susceptible to disease and other factors. The life storage of strains technology is basically utilizing tissue culture and cold storage where we can put the strain in a suspended growth state. So something that grows in 2 weeks, we can make it grow over a year. So this service is very valuable. All these different cannabis companies over the years have developed their own proprietary strains, and this is a really great way to preserve the genetics in real time. So the summary of our goods and services is tissue culture plantlets, as well as doing the live storage of strains. And the last piece we're very proud of is we do research on what we dubbed the cultivation schedules. So not only do we sell the starter plantlets to the growers, but we also provide them a solution how to properly grow it. You know, the type of fertilizer to be applied in what amounts. So we basically call it dialing into the strain.
Now, you mentioned growers. Is that your primary customer, selling the plantlets to growers?
Yes, it's growers of basically hemp farmers as well as the THC or marijuana growers, just the same. But we have a specific focus on the hemp farming. Since hemp is not as restrictive as is marijuana, and with the passage of the Farm Bill in the United States and Canada legalizing overall, the restrictions have been quite a bit lifted in terms of the ability to conduct the business when you're working with a hemp plant as opposed to working with marijuana plants.
Now, I know you're Canadian-based. You trade down here in the States on the OTC market. Do you sell here in the States also to growers or just in Canada?
Just for now, we're doing actually a pilot project in Canada. We're showing hemp farmers how to grow utilizing all-female starter plantlets. I mean, there's different ways to do it. Some people are really pushing for feminized seeds. In my 12-year career, I have never seen 100% feminized seeds. You always get 1 or 2% males, and that all it takes is for the, that amount of males to screw up entire field. In terms of, the males come in and they're only good for pollination. And once the female gets pollinated, about 80% of the flower gets lost due to seed production. Seeds do not contain any cannabinoid oils. They're primarily farmed for its content for the omega-3s and 6s. You can get the omegas-3s and 6s from fish oil or actually hemp seeds as well. That's been the predominant hemp industry for the last 20 to 40 years. And the new industry is farming for high CBD. And some of these particular strains, like our in-house strain that we called CBD Dana, is basically 14% CBD, and it grows very beautifully as a bush. So it's a very high-yielding plant.
Now, I've read articles and I've seen hemp used for clothing and building structures. I mean, making basically I think they call it hempcrete, like concrete bricks to build structures. The hemp that you grow or sell to grow, is it basically for extraction for excuse me, for medical purposes or clothing and other things too?
No, clothing and that aspect would be done from the hemp fibers. It's the industry still at an infancy stage. To date, you've seen a lot in the cottage industry producing sweaters and clothing overall, as you mentioned. That's fibers, seeds, omega-3s and 6s. The flower from the female material is the actual cannabinoids. Now, if you're just growing very high-valued flower tops that's unpollinated females, they contain the most cannabinoids. It's the best method of farming in terms of your revenue produced that way. And the content of the cannabinoids, if it's farmed that way and properly dried, not off the field, laying on the ground, where it can be contaminated, is very high-grade material for medical purposes. Can be used. And what you would make out of these hemp flower tops is actually whole hemp plant extract oils, which are very desirable for human formulations in terms of ingestion. Whereas CBD isolate, that's predominantly also made from the seed hemp type farming, because of the carcinogens it might contain and so forth, through those methods, is actually refined into purity, and it's called CBD isolate, where the purity content is around 99%. Oils, so between oils and solid form, when the oils are about 70-80%, they're still in the oil form in terms of concentration. Anything higher and it turns into a solid, which we call the CBD isolate.
You and I were talking before the show, and as you just stated now, you're very knowledgeable about, hemp and what your company does. How did you get into this business? You said you were in it for 12 years, but what's the story, the backstory on how you got into this particular business?
My entry into the business about 12 years ago was with the fact that I come from a medical family background. Dad being cardiologist, mother retired dentist, but she contracted stage 4 breast cancer that spread to her bone 12 years ago. So I already had a chemistry background in me, and I was already looking, okay, I realized that marijuana had medical benefits, and it was one of the solutions. Where actually the way it started, so I sent down back to my folks' house, a bag of marijuana. My mom smoked it, and she was on the couch with her legs up. My father comes home, sees Ma. First thing he does is calls me up, and he goes, "Son, you're the Antichrist. This ain't medicine." Mom is stoned on the couch. I'm like, "Just a minute, Dad. I'm telling you, it's going to work, and it's going to be beneficial." So instead of providing the raw smoke material, I got into the extraction side. And what I did provide for her was an extracted THC oils that I capsulated, and she was able to ingest. Over the last 12 years, I continue to do the efforts. I work with stage 4 cancer individuals, as well as those in debilitating pain, on a philanthropic effort where we're still trying to narrow down or figure out really between dosages and efficacy. There is a combination because of the entourage effect. That's predominantly the health benefits. If you take everything in the proper ratios, you'll get the best benefits. So far, what we found is about a 4-to-1 ratio. So call it, for example, if you have 60% CBD material, you want to make sure it contains 20% THC. Because there's as our scientists have pointed out, to a phenomenon called the negative loop back. So if you're just consuming CBD just by itself in a matter of 4 to 5 months, you might experience that your body will not be reacting in a positive way as it has in the beginning because of the entourage effect. Your body starts to missing some of the other components that are not present in just consuming CBD. So if individuals are really looking for the health benefits to cannabis overall, parts of marijuana or hemp, you want to look at the entourage effect and make sure there's a little bit of everything in there. And that's what our model was in terms of working with farmers to produce this high CBD hemp flower so that it can be extracted as a whole and then be applied in formulations for human ingestion. All mammals on the planet contain the endocannabinoid system. That's why it works so well for our pets in terms of, you see immediate release. It really is a body weight ratio in terms of the dosages, because THC is stored in the body's fat content. So figuring that out per person, we can really dial in and provide the most efficacious benefits to anybody who is seeking cannabis for its medical benefits.
You're listening to my guest, Peter Wojcik, and he is the CEO, chairman, founder of Pharmagreen Biotech Incorporated. It's a Canadian-based company, but they do trade on the OTC market here in the States. The stock symbol is PHBI. That's Paul Henry Bob Inc. PHBI. And again, they're in the hemp sector of the business. Now, having said that you're a Canadian company, plus we have the U.S. market, in your opinion, what is the best market? What is the difference between the Canadian market and the U.S. market? Is there an advantage in either one of them?
Yes. Well, first of all, the passage of the Farm Bill was a really great piece of legislation down here in the South. It really opened the farming and reduced the red tape and the regulations, which is very, very important. Just to mention as well, Pharmagreen Biotech Inc. is a U.S. company. It's Nevada domiciled with Canadian operations in Vancouver, British Columbia. Our first facility is built in Canada. We plan to build subsequent facilities in United States. The difference between the markets, Canada and United States, well, first of all, United States climate is extremely more favorable because you can grow almost all year round. So you can have 3 to 4 different growing seasons in United States, whereas opposed to Canada, we have one longer one. But really with Canada, even though we were the first G7 nation to legalize cannabis, but just because we legalized it, I think it is still being way over-regulated by Health Canada and the federal government. Even the rollout of the retail stores in a city like Vancouver, you can count them on your hand. I believe there's only 1 or 2 retail stores. So in my opinion, Canada, really we're leading the charge in terms of industrial nations legalizing the product and, the benefits of it. But we really have fallen behind in terms of the red tape and the stringent regulations that are in place with Health Canada. There's a big entry to business. Licenses take sometimes 2 to 5 years to actually be granted. Very high cost of entry into the business as well. So I would say United States is becoming the predominant producers of high quality, high CBD hemp production because of the Farm Bill and the way it really gave the freedom to the farmers to get involved in the business, gave the freedom to each individual state to regulate it as they see fit. That's something that we really should have followed through with legalization in Canada. Make it really, something is legal. What's the difference between growing tomatoes and growing hemp plants? None. It's just a different plant, and so should be the regulation based on the same, and not legalize it and over-regulate it. That's the Canadian problem.
Now, what is your revenue at this point? Are you pre-revenue or do you have existing revenue?
We have existing revenue through our affiliate company, which is Botanical Research in Motion. It's a private company controlled by me. Specifically, it was built to do research and development for future sales for the Pharmagreen Biotech cannabis complex that's under construction currently.
Okay. And I noticed a press release that came out, I believe it was last week sometime, talking about your S1 became effective. So let's discuss that a little bit. Now, the purpose of the S1 for you, I mean, I understand what an S1 is, but the S1 specifically for Pharmagreen Biotech, what is that going to accomplish to you and shareholders and the company?
It really moves us up, call it the tiers, in terms of being a public company. We're just in the process. We're a pink sheet company status. We'll call it reporting. We have filed our audits since we did the transaction to go public. And basically, we just started our process to migrate up to the OTCQB, and we look to be a NASDAQ-listed company sooner rather than later. So the advantage of the S1 is, it's quite a bit of disclosure that you do when you file the S1. So it really brings us into the upper tier company status where everything is disclosed and, we abide the regulations of being a public company. So I would say, and also part of the S1, we registered an offering of $2 per share up to 20 million shares. The use of proceeds that are going to be generated from the fundraising from the S1 offering is to build the facility, like I mentioned, in Vancouver. And the first funds coming into the till, we actually plan to build a state-of-the-art year-round greenhouse that will actually provide the company immediate revenues. We plan to build out is about 6 months of a greenhouse, and within 3 months we're actually being revenue producing as well. We've done a very successful pilot project this year, like I mentioned, where the sales of the clones, because our tissue facility isn't built yet, we've sold over 30,000 clones at $10 a piece in Canadian dollars, equivalent to about $7 US. But the big difference is we didn't sell clones. We also do another stage where we eliminate the risk of any, call it duds, or perhaps the plant might be subject to not making it or dying by acclimatization process, which is very important, especially for the Canadian climate as well, to make sure they're hardened, they're suited for the best growth factors as well as survivability. So when we do deliveries to farmers, we want to see a 99% plus delivery rate and success in terms of planting the plantlets.
Now, with your process of growing these starter plantlets, you basically, once your process is done and you're delivering them to the grower, they're over 99% germ-free and disease-free.
I would say through tissue culture, yes. The difference between tissue culture and cloning, if I may explain. So tissue culture is done basically in Petri dishes, in sterile environment, clean room labs. That's why the entries, for all companies, whether you're a small or a large producer, is very difficult to get started on the tissue culture because of contamination issues. If you contaminate your facility, you basically have to destroy the samples and start all over again. So the CapEx in terms of building these facilities is very expensive. For example, even the screws and the ducting have to be made out of stainless steel, because over time you'll attract sort of, the microbacteria that will accumulate if the place isn't properly built with antimicrobial walls and floors and cause contamination. So that's the benefit of tissue culture. And if you're producing plantlets from tissue culture, we will guarantee no diseases, no bugs, and most importantly, no genetic drift, which takes me to the topic of the difference between tissue culture and cloning. Cloning is generally done from a mother plant. So there's 2 stages to growing cannabis, whether it be for marijuana or hemp. You have first the vegetative period. So as long as the light cycle is more than 14 hours a day, the female plant will never produce a flower, will just continuously to grow bigger. As soon as outdoors, the photocycle changes to 14 hours or less, you see the female developing the flower. And those are the 2 cycles. So in cloning, you take the clones from a mother plant that's basically in the vegetative stage that hasn't produced the flower. But a good analogy to cloning is this. The plant is quite big. You can take a lot of clones from it. But every time you take a clone, a good analogy is like cutting yourself. Cut yourself once, it hurts. Cut yourself 500 times, and you're liable to go into septic shock and not do very well. And the same thing goes for a mother plant in terms of the cannabis. The more tips you take from it, the more the plant's genetic switch into survivability mode. So if you're producing even clones in a large number of them and you really aren't inexperienced, you will see that, oh, well, why are these clones popping roots sooner? These ones aren't. Why are these ones just stunted, not doing anything? Well, exactly for those factors, because the plant, doesn't speak to you unlike human. A human will tell you, it hurts, don't do anymore, whereas the plant doesn't do that. So with tissue culture, the main difference is there is none of that shock as you're producing the tissue cultures. And whether we make 1 or 1 trillion of them, there's never present a genetic drift. And that's the big problem if you want to produce, whether it be hemp or marijuana, for medical grade quality made out of clones. The bigger you get, the bigger the operations you get, the more of the clones become weaker, not only in genetics, but also becoming really basically more susceptible to disease and bugs. So tissue culture is really, it's been around for 40 years. It's not relatively, call it new technology, but it's growing in terms of acceptability to produce a very high quality starter plantlets, which in turn can produce for you with a proper, cultivating schedule, a very high quality end product, which is the bud produced from the female.
And who's your competition?
Our competition, I'd say companies is, Segra. I'm working with another company out of California. I'm glad to mention them, Meristematic. We have ongoing discussions to work very closely together. As we as a company, Pharmagreen, we plan to be a global company and producing these proprietary design, state-of-the-art, and the latest technology utilized facilities, not only in Canada, but United States, Europe, and wherever the industry might take us. The facility we're building, you'll see actually we just released a news release on PHBI is the symbol with regards to Philips LED lighting. They operate it under one of their companies, under Signify. What impressed me so much about their technology is not only LEDs is really here, the new technology, it's energy efficient, but it's also you can dim their LED lighting as well as change the spectrum of light. So with those type of technologies, we call our Cannabis Biotech complex a recession-proof facility. Because today, yes, we're doing cannabis because obviously margins are there. It's a growing industry, and hemp is growing 10,000 times faster even than marijuana itself in terms of if you compare the two industries. But being recession-proof in the sense if you're utilizing the latest technologies and the ability to really control the lighting spectrum like that, we can grow any plant species. As you know, because of the climate change, the nutritional value over the last 5 years has declined quite drastically in terms of our food production. So as you know, how do you, in the field produce the food? Well, when they sow the seed in the ground, 80% goes for food production, 20% of the seed is saved for next year's crop. But every year as the environment hardens and the climate becomes harder, the seeds become more adaptable to survivability as opposed to being, the top sort of plant to produce the nutrients that we intake. So this is what we are able to do is through preservation of the genetics for any plant species, and then we can actually utilize our technologies to go beyond cannabis down the road.
You're listening to Business Pulse Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michael Brette. Business Pulse Talk Radio is the heartbeat of business. I have my very special guest with me today is Peter Wojcik. He's the CEO, chairman, founder of Pharmagreen Biotech Incorporated, publicly traded company here on the OTC market. Stock symbol is PHBI, Paul Henry Bob Inc., PHBI. And Peter, we only have a couple of minutes to go, so give us your website for our listeners and the best way to contact you, email address.
Great. So our website is www.pharmagreen.ca. Pharma being spelled with PH. So PHARMAGREEN.ca. best contact would be my corporate email, which is pw@pharmagreen.ca. I look forward to anybody interested in discussing our business and our strategies further. Please contact me, and I'll be very glad to respond.
Excellent, excellent. And we're actually doing a series of road shows for Pharmagreen. We have a road show today in Newport Beach at Fashion Island. Then we have one tomorrow in downtown San Diego at the Westgate Hotel. And then on the 25th of July, we're in La Jolla at George's at the Cove restaurant. But we're all filled up. But we are doing a series of road shows, non-deal road shows, so that we can get Pharmagreen Biotech some exposure to the broker-dealer network down here, investment banking network, other people in the hemp business, maybe possibly some joint ventures. And they do have a $5 million offering that they're coming out with.
Actually, it's the offering is we're raising $40 million
Okay.
for the construction. So the offering is $2 per share, up to 20 million shares. And through the S1 registration, those shares are free trading. There's no hold period on them. So if you want to be active, involved with our company and be a day trader, you're welcome to. And I look forward to anybody who's interested in participating in our offering.
Again, Peter Wojcik, CEO, Chairman, Founder of Pharmagreen Biotech Incorporated, stock symbol PHBI, and you've been listening to Business Pulse Talk Radio, the heartbeat of business. I'm your host, Michael Brette. We're going to sign off now. We'll see you next week on the radio.